Hey guys, Matt Easton here. So, I've been one of the people amongst various other people, including Lindy Beige and other people I think, who have made videos about the fact that swords and knives in movies and TV often go schwing when they're drawn out of the scabbard, and how this is incorrect. Well, actually, here I am, I'm going to basically kind of contradict myself, or I would prefer to say correct myself. And add a caveat to the whole topic. So, generally speaking, the issue that we're talking about is medieval weapons being drawn out of either wooden or leather scabbards. Okay. Now, quite a few of you have quite correctly noted that when I draw 19th century swords out of scabbards, sometimes they make a schwing, and this is an interesting thing. Now, if I just take an example here with. This is an entirely steel scabbard with a brass throat, essentially. Okay. When I draw it out, let's listen. Yes, it makes a schwing. Okay. So what is it doing that? Is it the steel scabbard? Well, let's have a look. Some of you noticed in a recent video I did that this sword here made a schwing sound. Now, what's interesting and slightly ironic, and I suppose I actually had to go and check this myself actually, is that this scabbard isn't steel, it's wood and leather, like a medieval sword scabbard would be. So let's draw it out again. So you'll notice it's not quite as loud as the steel scabbard, but it does make a schwing. So I started to look at it and analyse what it is that's making the noise. And in actual fact, it's not the edge scraping against the scabbard, because the scabbard's made of wood and leather's on the outside, so there's no contact with the leather in this case. But as you draw it out, all that happens is as you get to the end, the very tip of the sword just flicks against that brass throat. So in actual fact, you do get a schwing sound, and this undoubtedly is what movie makers have been emulating since movies began, basically. So as soon as they started adding sound effects to movies, and of course sound, in fact, in the 1920s and 30s, presumably their point of reference was military swords, because they'd seen them on parade, or at least they went to someone and said, oh, what does a sword sound like coming out of a scabbard? And that's the sound they hear. And what's interesting is this, as I just reiterate, that is an entirely wood and leather scabbard, only the throat is brass. There's no real damage being done to a sharp edge in this case, because of course you've got very hard carbon steel blade, and this is brass, or what was sometimes called at the time German silver, which is more like a pewter type metal. So kind of pewter, sometimes silver, sometimes nickel, or alloys of nickel and copper and other sort of things. But more or less you could call it brass in most cases, okay, or bronze or brass. And bronze or brass is relatively soft compared to hard steel. So would it damage the edge? Well, no. It's kind of, it might over a long period of time slightly blunt the edge. But hopefully you'll be keeping your edge sharp anyway. But what's interesting is that the thing that actually makes the sound is not the sword coming out to that point. Okay, that makes no real noise. What makes the noise is just this little friction at the end as the blade flicks out. Okay, so it's actually the very tip of the blade, which frankly you don't have to really worry about being blunted against a brass throat, because it's not going to be. And it's not actually really contacting with the cutting edge of the blade, it's really just contacting with the tip, and it's that sound of the tip striking the brass throat. Just to show that this is certainly the case, what I have here is another antique sword, this being a 1897 pattern, and this is also a wood and leather scabbard, but you'll notice this example has no brass throat at all. At the exit, at the top of the scabbard, and it's utterly silent. So this scabbard is actually closest to what a medieval scabbard for a medieval, long sword or a one-handed sword, arming sword, would be. And in fact, equally of rapiers and most Renaissance swords, they would be wood with leather over leather covering them to basically hold the wood together, and give some degree of weatherproofing as well. And you'll notice it's almost silent coming out of the scabbard. I'm actually trying to flick the point. That's the most noise I can get. Let's just hear that again. Okay, so it's almost silent. There's a slight kind of brushing sound, but it doesn't make any schwing or anything because I don't have a metal kind of throat or exit to the scabbard there. And final example I use, this example actually is a leather scabbard. If I just pull it out slowly so as to not give away what the sound will be. This, as you'll see, is bendy. Okay. Now what's interesting is in most movies and TV things, you'll notice medieval swords are usually given these sort of flexible leather scabbards, and in actual fact some Renaissance swords did have flexible leather scabbards that when the sword was drawn, the scabbard would be drawn with it and they're basically thrown aside. They're essentially just a pretty much disposable carriage device for the sword. However, in the medieval period it's conspicuous that most scabbards were actually wood lined, so they shouldn't be. If you're watching a movie and you see someone's scabbard flopping around like that and it's supposed to be set in the medieval period, I won't say it's wrong, but it's not kind of normal for a medieval scabbard. Most medieval scabbards are stiff because they're wood. They're a wood scabbard with leather over the top. This is entirely leather, and as you would expect, when I draw the sword out, it makes no sound at all. Okay, it basically sounds like a hamster brushing against a cushion. Okay, there's like no notable noise there whatsoever. So there we go. The schwing that you get from swords is not incorrect per se, but only for the swords which have a metal throat to them. Okay, the scabbard doesn't have to be metallic. The scabbard can be wood and leather, but the throat has to be metallic to get that sound. And it's actually the throat of the scabbard that makes sound. One thing I should mention, the reason that the steel scabbard is more noisy even than the wood scabbard with the metal throat is because when you draw it out, the noise is still coming from the throat there, the brass throat. But because this is more kind of tinny and hollow, it kind of amplifies the sound, much like a string on a guitar. This acts as a sound box and actually makes the sound louder. This, being wood and leather, kind of deadens the sound. Okay, so there we go. The noise comes from the metal throat. If there is no metal throat, there should be no schwing. Okay, cheers.